David Ryshpan here for Sortiesjazznights.com. We are in the Stevie Wonder room in the Maison du Festival, and we are joined by trumpeter and composer Christian Scott, who is playing tonight at Jésus with his quintet, featuring Matt Stevens on guitar, Toronto boy, Milton Fletcher on piano and keyboards, Chris Funn on bass, and Jamire Williams on drums. And welcome back. This is your second show.
Well, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. I didn't know this was the Stevie Wonder room. No, that's cool.
So you're promoting your new album. Yesterday you said tomorrow, which is doing.
I don't promote albums.
You're
touring
that
I'm performing,
album.
and they're selling it when we perform.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure.
And on that album, it kind of follows in the footsteps of Anthem in the sense that there's a lot of tunes on it that are, for lack of a better term, maybe programmatic. Or they tell a story,
sure,
and that's something
sure.
that's admirable. Last time I saw you at Jésus, you were very clear about the stories and inspirations behind the songs that you're writing.
Yeah.
So can you talk about the role of those stories and of those emotions in terms of process and in terms of just basic inspiration?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've always been a fan of people composing music that relates to their experience and their reality. I feel as though most of the jazz musicians now have sort of brought into the type of insincerity in context of their music that's required of them to survive music.
Right.
And for me, my experience has been a little different. I've seen a lot of things. I've experienced some pretty graphic things, and I've always been someone that's been very fond of people that are willing to share their stories as a means to relating, and so I always figured if I really made a run at doing this, that the way that I prefer to approach it would be from the stance of a storyteller, someone that would like to illuminate these ideas and these concepts and these realities to people that may not be in the position to actually experience them, whether that's good or bad.
Right, you were talking about, a lot of the track titles or song titles on Yesterday You Said Tomorrow make references to things that are sort of emblematic of Louisiana and the American South, like Angola, Louisiana, and the 13th Amendment, genocide.
Sure.
And maybe for people who are watching this that aren't familiar with those situations and the reality of life in that neck of the woods, can you talk about why those stories are so important for you to share and to tell? Yeah,
well, I think for all people, if you, depending on where you're from, the geography of where you're from, and the culture where you're from, the politics of where you're from, I think those are things that you should want to illuminate to other people. I think disseminating information about your reality is important. But as for where I'm from, it has a very specific pedigree and context to really, really negative attitudes and behaviors towards African Americans. And when I was a little boy, a man told me he'd lynch me for nothing. So it's been my reality, and I don't feel as though everyone knows that these type of things are still going on, are being allowed to permeate there. I think people think Obama's the president. You know what I mean? And they say, okay, well, the hurricane was 5 years ago, and they don't realize that there are people that are still having a hard time down there just navigating through their experience, just because people view them as being inferior to them. And all my music doesn't see to illuminate this to people. There's songs on my records about all types of issues, but I think these ones are the most important for my experience, just because I realized at a young age that I had an obligation, sort of a social contract to my culture, to talk about these things if I had the opportunity to do that.
Right. Yeah. There's a couple of winks and nods in the cover art of the new album, the back cover.
We were just talking about that with my shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like the back cover references the classic Blue Note records. Sure. You recorded it at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in Englewood Cliffs. The front cover also looks half Blue Note, half Bob Dylan era Columbia records. Can you talk about why those references were important for you to make?
Well, we were trying to make a correlation between the seriousness of a lot of those documents and what was going on at the time that we decided that we were going to try to make a snapshot of, which is the 1960s. And it's strange because the more I think about that, the more I realize that we couldn't have made a better decision in context of that, because people, they see it and they want to know why. But for me, I mean, it was incredibly important. It was paramountly important that people understood that when they pick this album up, you get the seriousness of it. There's a brevity to just the look of the album. So I mean, I think it makes most people say, well, if I listen to this, this is obviously a document that's by a serious human being. So if I'm into that, then I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and listen to it. And we've been fortunate in that the reception to it has been really cool.
Can you talk about the guys in your band? You have a really special relationship with Matt Stevens in particular. I know you made mention of that last time you guys played at Jésus. And actually, to me, Milton Fletcher and Chris Funn on your record, that's the first time I've heard of these cats.
Okay.
So can you talk about your relationship with all the guys in the band, where you've met them,
Yeah, well, I mean, most of the guys I met when we were, still in high school. I met Jamar when we were 14 or 15 years old. We did the Vail Jazz Camp, which is a camp where they pick like the top 10 young jazz musicians in America, and they send them to this peak, really, I like to call it, because it's so high up. And you're there for 2 weeks, and you just workshop and network with these 10 kids. And I remember Jamar and I actually met the first day of camp, and we immediately struck a chord with each other because we made fun of everybody else that was there. We're both Southern. He's from Houston, so we played the dozens with everybody, and that's how our rapport started. But so I've known him a very long time. Milton I met when I was 17. We met when we were both going to Berkeley. And for years I always thought Milton was older than me just because he was so mature when we were in school. I'd be coming home from a session at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd be like, what's up, little baby? How is it? And he'd be like, you've got to get your life together. And I'd just be like, wow, this guy is really way too serious. But eventually we cultivated a relationship, and that's how we became friends. And Chris Funn is the same thing. But I noticed later on that they all have a very particular psychological perversion as it relates to their musicality, which is that they all cultivated something very special at a very young age that most of their peer musicians didn't understand. So their peers at the time, ridiculed them. But when you're dealing with that type of intellect musically, the last thing you want to do is ridicule that person, because they're going to internalize it and continue to cultivate themselves. So it's like their peers really created monsters, and so they have a very specific way of approaching everything, which is not only do they have their own unique voices that are truly their own, but they understand the canon and the tradition of this music on a level that most musicians don't, because they refine themselves to show others that, okay, well, not only can I do that, which is unique, but I can also play like Oscar Peterson, I can also play like Art Tatum, I can also play like Herbie Hancock, and I can also play like Keith Jarrett, and I can show you on anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a different thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Matt Stevens, you called him your musical director.
Yeah, that's my boy. I'm sorry, that's where you started. Yeah, Matt is a little different just because we're best friends.
Right.
And everything that I've done up until this point with my band, we've really been partners in that. And he's incredibly supportive, and it's just great to be able to deal with someone that is always going to be honest, and whether or not it's in that person's best interest or not. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the best thing about the situation that we've cultivated is that none of us stand alone. And I think lots of times now most musicians, they'd rather not have a band, one, because it's cheaper, two, because the record companies don't want them. So you find that most of these guys, they refine themselves around everything being around them being the center of attention. What I've noticed that's popped up more often than not is these guys usually stand alone. No one really has their backs musically, or even lots of times in their personal lives as it relates to other musicians and music. Whereas with my group, that's not the case, And Matthew was the first component to that. So I love him and appreciate him.